point, like, please ask questions, be curious. That's what we want. And I will pass over to Kayla for an outline of tonight's program.
Okay, so yes, before we do that, I would just like to dedicate some time to honor the land that we live on. So if you know what land you are on, and you can feel free to type it into the chat. And if you don't, then I will make sure the website to do that is also in the chat. And while we do that, yes, I will go over what we are doing tonight with our time. So first, we're going to hear from our amazing speakers. We have Dr. Suárez-Abraham here, Reverend Will McGarvey, and Maha El-Junaidi. I hope I pronounced everyone's names correctly. And once they are done telling us a little bit about their backgrounds and why decolonizing religion is important to them and why we should care about it, we will go into small groups to discuss our insights and our key takeaways so far, and then come back together for a Q&A session. Now I'd like to have our speakers introduce themselves. So we'll start with Dr. Suárez-Abraham, then we'll go on to Reverend Will, and then Maha.
And for your introductions, if you could just say your name, your pronouns, if you're comfortable sharing that, and just a brief description of who you are and the work that you do, that would be perfect.
Just so you know, we're putting your bios that you sent us in the chat, but if there's something more, I don't know, less formal that you'd like to share with us, this would be the time for that.
There's absolutely nothing more exciting. Thank you. So my name is Anthony Suárez-Abraham, and my pronouns are he, him, and él. And I'm a Cuban-American, originally from Miami, Florida. I just moved to the Central Coast here in California from Chicago a little bit over a year ago. So I'm quite new to the area. And my I'm a adjunct member of the theology faculty at St. Mary's. And my area of specialization is Latino theology in particular. So I'm delighted to be with you to share some thoughts and engage in a conversation on this important topic. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Reverend Will McGarvey. This is Ricky Bobby, the fastest Chihuahua in the West. And I've been the Executive Director of the Interfaith Council of Contra Costa County since 2012. I served on the Executive Committee from 2004 to 2010. Before going off the board for a few years and then coming back as a staff person. And we have 109 congregations, monasteries, and retreat centers around the county, and do a lot of interfaith peace work, as well as understanding other faith traditions. And then this is a topic that I've spent a bit of time in my own congregation. I preach every other week at East County Shared Ministry, which is a Presbyterian UCC congregation, one of the only progressive Christian congregations in East Contra Costa County. And I've been the minister there since 2004 as well. I did my my thesis in college at Westminster College of Salt Lake City on Is Christianity Responsible for the Ecological Crisis?
Hello, everyone. My name is Maha El-Junaidi. I'm Muslim. As you can tell. I am the founder of the Islamic Networks Group, which is an organization that was started in 1993, so it's 28 years old. And we provide education about Muslims and their faith in a variety of contexts, which I'll be talking about. I recently gave up my seat as the executive director, and we've transitioned to a new person. And so I have this fancy schmancy title called Chief Innovation Officer, which was one of my first innovative acts. I needed a big title because I sit in a lot of boards and a lot of committees in my county and at the state level around hate crimes and ethnic studies and what's the latest, reimagining public safety. And it's, when you get older, you get asked to sit on all these different committees. Yeah, so we have affiliates in different parts of the country, and we run some really exciting programs that include a lot of speakers, including Will here. And yeah, so that's it.
Thank you so much for sharing. So now we're going to start with our actual presentations, and we're actually going to start with Dr. Suárez-Abraham. So take it away.
All right. So I would like to express my gratitude, of course, to the University Ministry for the kind invitation to join you this evening at this conversation that indeed, I think as one of the emails or flyers said, needs to be had again. So thank you, Kristen and Kayla and Brenda for organizing this event. I would also like to express my gratitude to my colleagues on this panel, Will and Maha. I look forward to learning from your wisdom. So the organizers for tonight asked me to consider 3 questions. The first one is, how has colonialism shaped religion? Why is this important, and why should we care? And why did I decide to be part of this event? And I only have about 15 or 20 minutes, so say a prayer. So how has colonialism shaped religion? In the short time I have, it's simply not possible to provide all of the important dimensions that this important question deserves. I thus invite you to consider taking the course Colonialism, Race, and Religion, which I believe will be offered this coming fall by my colleague, Dr. Ann Carpenter, but Dr. Poundstone, who I believe is here, can confirm that. And there's good stuff to be had in that course, to be sure. Most scholars who work in the area of colonial, decolonial, and or post-colonial thought agree that, broadly conceived, the term decolonizing stretches back to European colonialism. Historically speaking, the colonial mindset determined that the rich resources of newly discovered lands, which of course were never new, which were not new, nor were they discovered, could be better used by the European colonizers. And by rich resources, I am also referring to the exploitation of its people. It did not matter that the resources did not belong to the colonizers, nor that the lands were inhabited by indigenous communities that were just as philosophically, theologically, and scientifically sophisticated as, say, the Greeks or the Romans. For these European Christian colonizers, the primacy of the Bible and the centrality of the person fashioned after white men, if not the celibate white men, was normative. Anything that did not fit into this norm was considered inferior, less highly developed, demonic, non-human, and or existing in its natural state. This served, as the Asian theologian Irene Oh points out, that the, quote, justification for the subjugation, colonization, and conversion of Asians, Africans, indigenous peoples, and other groups at the hands of, quote, enlightened European Christians, end quote. From the very beginning of the European encounter with the lands and peoples of the Americas, religion and its armaments, including the Bible, doctrines, creeds, rules, teachings, etc., served as a point of departure and a point of reference by priests and profiteers as what Fernando Segovia terms faithful ally and effective weapons of the conquest. Theologically, the so-called discovery of the Americas by the European colonizers generated a great apocalyptic zeal for those who interpreted this discovery in terms of the real-life realization of the Great Commission of Jesus that is recounted in the 25th chapter of the Christian Gospel of Matthew. Quote, "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit." End quote. Latino biblical scholar Jean-Pierre Ruiz notes, quote, "For the missionaries in the Americas and the theologians in Europe, the evangelization of the peoples they encountered was a sign that human history had entered its final momentous hour and that the eschatological consummation of all things was on the horizon." End quote. Religious fervor was in the air, and it was thick, much to the detriment of those who encountered this version of Matthew 25. The quote, "faithful ally and effective weapons of the Hebrew and Christian scriptures were frequently used to justify and sanction the necessary use of violence and destruction to conquer the people. The book from the prophet Joshua, for example, was employed as proof that the colonizers were following the rule and prophecy of God. In this Joshua text, the destruction of Jericho and the massacre of its population was divinely ordered and ordained. The colonizers, understanding themselves to be agents of God, who encountered savages, followed suit and destroyed the fantastic city of Tenochtitlan, plundering all of its riches and slaughtering most of its inhabitants. Tenochtitlan was the great capital of the Aztecs, which today is modern-day Mexico City. In a mere 10 years, 90% of the Aztec culture and people were wiped off the planet due to violence and or disease. In other parts of Latin America, like the Caribbean, the indigenous Taino were completely wiped from the face of the earth. They no longer exist. For those unlucky enough to survive, the Christian Gospel of Luke was the divine instrument used to force the conversion of the indigenous to Christianity. The 14th chapter of Luke reads, quote, "Go out into the roads and lanes and compel people to come in so that my house may be filled." End quote. Father Virgilio Elizondo, considered to be one of the fathers of Catholic Latino theology in the United States, remarks how the colonizers would often boil large cauldrons of oil to illustrate what would happen to the Aztecs if they decided not to convert to Christianity. The religious would then toss animals into the pots of boiling oil to watch and hear them die in utter agony. Why the use of oil? Because oil boils at a higher temperature than water. All of this, of course, out of concern for the eternal soul of the indigenous Aztecs. Such is the history of the European conquest. It was brutal, and there is no way of hiding from this truth. 500 years later, on the occasion of a visit from then Pope John Paul II to Latin America in 1985, a letter from the indigenous peoples of the Americas was given to the Pope. This letter captures the aftermath, the after effects of Europe's ideological colonization of its people, a legacy that remains with us today. Here is an excerpt from that letter. "We, Indians of the Andes and of America, decided to take advantage of the visit of John Paul II to return to him his Bible, because in 5 centuries it has given us neither love, peace, nor justice. Please take your Bible back and return it to our oppressors, because they need its moral precepts more than we do. Because ever since the arrival of Christopher Columbus to America, the culture, language, and religion and European values were imposed by force. the Bible came to us as part of the imposition of colonial change. It is the ideological arm of the colonialist assault, end quote. What I find particularly interesting about this letter to the Pope is that the indigenous do not reject the sacred book of the Bible. Curious. To them, rather, it is the Christians, it seems, that need the Bible more than the indigenous communities. They, the indigenous, reject how it was and continues to be interpreted and used against them as the ideological arm of the colonialist assault. Such is the work of decolonizing religion. And in this case, or my case, decolonizing Christianity. Conscious of this history, which remains with us today in many forms, Sri Lankan biblical scholar Rashish Sujirtha reminds us that the decolonizing of religion entails, quote, scrutinizing and exposing colonial domination and power as these are embodied in religious discourse and interpretation, and searching for alternative hermeneutics while thus overturning and dismantling colonial perspectives, end quote. This leads me to the second question on why this is important and why we should care. In short, colonization is the legacy of Europe. And the many forms of Christianity, and many expressions of religions for that matter, remain gripped in European and/or American forms, structures, and symbols to the continued subjugation of communities of color. For these and many other reasons, I think the work of decolonizing religion across the spectrum is not only important, but also central in our world today. I just don't see how theology, to which I would add ministry, can be engaged responsibly without taking the insights and contributions of decolonial thinkers not only seriously, but at the core of theological discourse and ministerial praxis. From my point of view, as a Latino and a person of faith, we should care because first and foremost, as Christian decolonial thinkers have pointed out, Jesus says it's important. And that should be enough, at least if we take the God dude seriously. Jesus enfleshes a decolonial praxis that questions and pushes back against epistemological assumptions of empire. His aim in the proclamation of the kingdom of God encompasses a faith in God that opts for the poor to be liberated and act as agents of social transformation. So it matters to Jesus, and that should be enough for Christians. But for those who need more on why this matters and why we should care, I will highlight a few other examples. We continue to see the horrific effects of this legacy day after day after day after day in the killing of Black and brown bodies, in the killing of Asian American and Pacific Islander bodies, in the killing of indigenous bodies. Too many people are simply dying before their time. This is not to mention the manner in which communities of color remain marginalized, oppressed, abused, invisible, and excluded in their daily cotidiano, their daily lives. The so-called father of liberation theology, Gustavo Gutierrez, tells us that poverty means death. In this sense, communities of color are living daily in spaces and places of death. As such, this should underscore the urgency of now. For this reason, decolonizing religion should matter, and we should care deeply for the work and witness will literally save a life, if not your own or my own. My colleagues on this panel represent another reason why decolonizing religion matters and why we should care. In our work to move from a diverse community to a more plural existence, I just don't see how ecumenical and interfaith engagement is possible without the insights of decolonial theory. However important it may be, it is simply no longer enough to recognize the beautiful diversity of our society, our neighbors, our institutions. The conversation and practice of ecumenical and interfaith discourse must, I suggest, move the needle forward towards pluralism, which is defined by Diana Eck as, quote, the energetic engagement of diversity through the active seeking of understanding across lines of difference, end quote. Diversity is a fact, it's science. Diverse people living in close quarters. Pluralism is the achievement of a state where people respect each other and their differences, engage in relationship, and together work towards the creation of a more just and humane world. There are countless examples on why decolonizing religion is important, like, for instance, the mere relevance of Christianity in the world today. Some scholars like Tomoko Masuzawa have questioned the very category of religion as unsalvageable, precisely because of the very legacy in which religion has created such massive and widespread oppression. But I will offer one final example connected to the institution that brings us together, St. Mary's College. St. Mary's is designated as an Hispanic Serving Institute or institution, an HSI. What this federal designation means for St. Mary's and its students, staff, and faculty, and indeed for institutions of higher learning across the United States, is foundational to the question of why this work matters and why we should care. As a Catholic religious institution, decolonizing religion offers challenges to the very mission, vision, and work of St. Mary's in profound and important ways across the spectrum. For example, how does the mission and vision of St. Mary's, rooted in decolonizing ideologies, identify who it serves, clearly and unambiguously? How does St. Mary's reflect all of its stakeholders in its HSI identity, allowing the focus to be on ways to enact an identity that best serves all minoritized students? How does the strategic planning of the college define its purpose in measurable ways that fulfills its mission as an HSI? How does the HSI designation at St. Mary's aim for the proactive mixing of races, cultures, and social backgrounds in ways that don't erase difference, but rather in a manner that recognizes the complexity and intersectionality of the rich identities that are present at St. Mary's today? How do curricular and co-curricular programming enhance St. Mary's ability to uplift and liberate the people and communities it serves as an HSI? As I mentioned earlier, I am new to St. Mary's and thus don't have the answers to these questions. And at this point, there's no reason for me to believe that St. Mary's isn't working hard on these and similar questions. But these are the types of questions that a decolonial lens can bring to help institutions dismantle oppressive structures, which, in the final analysis, is the goal of an HSI. Towards this end, institutions can shift the needle from being Hispanic enrolling to truly that of being Hispanic serving. There is much more that can be said on how and why decolonial thought is important right here at St. Mary's: governance, leadership, external partners, infrastructure, etc. Suffice to say, as the gathering this evening will suggest, decolonizing religion is a reality that not only matters, it is also a reality that we should deeply care about. And this leads me to the third question, which I will attempt to answer using a personal anecdote that highlights not only why I am here, but also illustrates the importance of decolonial thinking. It might not be what you think. The third question is, why did you decide to be part of this event? So as a Latino theologian, the idea of social location plays an important methodological role. Latino theology proposes that we are a product of personal background and life experiences. Nothing new there. Important influences on our theological reflection include culture, language, geography, race, gender, sexual orientation, politics, economics, faith, and so on, and so on, and so on. So, in the flyer that was circulated for this event, you read a little bit about me and my social location. One thing that was left out of that brief bio, and is important to the conversation this evening, is that I am a sexist. I would like to repeat that just in case you may not have heard me correctly. I am a sexist. When I take an honest and critical view of my social location, it is not difficult to come to this conclusion. The truth is that for over 5 centuries, patriarchal and paternalistic ideologies have reinforced a culture of sexist oppression against women. In Latino culture, for example, one form in which sexism is made manifest is through a form of toxic masculinity known as machismo. In many Latino and Hispanic cultures, machismo acts as the cornerstone of family relationship and gender roles. I see many heads nodding. For example, it was my brother and I that received the fancy high school and college education. The need for an education was not prioritized for my sister because there were other cultural expectations for her future, namely being a stay-at-home wife and having children. I can't tell you enough how much I hear this in our classrooms with my own students today. What I can say is that at the very best, I am trying not to be a sexist. And here I am working very hard at it, despite the occasional grumbling from my wife. I am deeply committed to feminist theology, mujerista theology, womenist theology. In my courses, these pioneering women scholars are all over my syllabi. I attend and support countless rallies in support of women's rights, in favor of equal pay. And in fact, it angers me that my wife, who is a brilliant surgeon with credentials from the finest medical schools and training institutions in the world, gets paid less than her male counterparts for the same procedure. None of my commitments for the causes of women will matter much because, in the final analysis, the culture that I am part of, not only as a Latino, but also as an American, the culture that you and I are part of, will be and is sexist for me. Despite my honest and sincere commitments to the feminist cause, and believe me, I am, the fact of the matter is that the culture around me, the culture that is in and around you, will make sure that I get paid more than a woman, that my voice is heard with more authority than that of a woman, that I don't have to work as hard at being credible as the woman sitting next to me at the same meeting or boardroom, if she's even in the room. You see, despite how loud my voice is, the culture that I am part of will be sexist for me by advancing the baked-in privileges that come with being a male. This, dear friend, is an example of the legacy of colonialism. And it is not only deeply baked into the apple pie of the Western world, it is also very difficult to change the recipe. Some might even argue that it is impossible. The truth is, I will never get beyond being a sexist because it simply runs too deep in the world that formed me. In order for me to move beyond being a sexist, it would mean for me to actively and consciously engage in the work of dismantling the very structures that privileges me, my maleness, and maleness altogether. Just like I am a sexist and part of the system that privileges my gender, we are all part of a system that has racism, misogynist, homophobia, and many other forms of oppression and exclusion baked into its very structures. No matter how much you and I are committed to the issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, the bottom line is that the culture resists those efforts for us, and consequently, we are complicit. I am here as a reminder that although I am a fancy schmancy Latino theologian, I have much work to do. I don't know it all. I have much more to learn and deconstruct. I am complicit in all sorts of oppressive structures, including the space that colonial narratives rent freely in my head. These narratives have taught me not to like myself very much, that I am not good enough, that I am existentially dirty, to think less of myself because I am Latino, might speak a little funny, or come from another part of the world. The aforementioned thoughts are deeply rooted in the colonial mindset and legacy. So the question for me as a Christian, and perhaps for you, is how do we do Christianity? Or how do we do religion apart from Eurocentric thinking? How do we do Christianity or religion apart from the symbols of Eurocentric thinking? What does it mean to be a Christian? And by extension, a Jew, a Muslim, a Sikh, and so on. From the Black experience, from the Latino experience, from the Asian experience. I very much look forward to learning from you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you